Welcome to our market research project. Today we will be presenting our findings on high school athletics and the college recruiting process.
It is the dream of every young athlete to make it to the big stage and play their sport at the collegiate level. For many, this dream does not come true. However, for almost 500,000 athletes, it does. Within this process of recruitment to play in college, many questions arise. What sets these athletes apart? What did these athletes do differently? Who is the ideal college recruit? One of the factors that significantly impacts the college recruiting process is access to private versus public education. By understanding this segment, we have also identified ways in which public schools can minimize the recruiting gap between school types and work towards an equal playing field for all high school athletes. Looking at key players, there's many that affect the college recruiting process, the most important being technology. As with anything, technology is fast growing and is used in different ways, such as social media, highlight videos, and being in contact with these coaches. Secondly, family and friends are vital. With anything, a strong support system is necessary, specifically in sports with funding, transportation, motivation, etc. Academics are also important to coaches as one of the first things coaches look at are GPA and test scores. Coaches want well-rounded athletes in all aspects. Location is also vital in terms of training resources and advantages that athletes in these states do have. Additionally, the sport that you play can affect your ability to get recruited to college when comparing a sport like football versus a more niche sport like golf or field hockey. And finally, money plays a huge role. Equipment, camps, and tournaments are not cheap and therefore at times aren't accessible to a lot of athletes.
So now to go into the user profile, the demographics that we're looking at are 14 to 18-year-old students of varying genders, ethnicities, and backgrounds, and they're all seeking opportunities to play sports in college. They all have varying access to technology, funds, coaching, and mentorship, and some potential solutions for them will be Division 1, 2, or 3 programs, and sometimes even professional teams. And lastly, the key benefit that they're seeking is this athletic career starter. So it all starts with awareness, starting at a young age, kind of gaining awareness from peers at school, and then really becoming a standout athlete or star player and beginning to concentrate on one sport. And then when one gets older, they go into a public or private school for middle and high school, where then their resources change and access to different programs. And some students in both of these types of schools have access to travel and club teams, but that is limited by access to capital. And lastly, they make it to college or the university stage, which is only 6% of athletes in high school. Next, for a quick features comparison, it's clear that private schools have a wealth of resources that are not given to public school students, including high quality photo and video footage and access to high quality facilities, along with elite coaching and athletic training. And lastly, access to technologies that serve as a competitive advantage.
So the PCP map shows that there's a linear relationship between funding and exposure. And as you can see here, low funded public schools have much lower athlete exposure than private schools and accelerator schools. You can also see that, there's an outlier, which is charter schools and magnet schools. And that's because they don't really focus on sports, and yet they get high funding.
Next, we have Porter's 5 forces. Rivalry amongst competitors in this industry would be public versus private schools in the traditional sense, and different factors there include levels of funding and different resources that allow their schools and their athletes to succeed. Threat of new entrants in this category would be specialized accelerator schools, new schools that are sport specific and offer unrivaled resources and education to prepare athletes for college. The bargaining power of buyers in this case is the decision making of student athletes and their families. They can decide based on how much money and other factors where they want to send their kids to school. For suppliers, public schools often are limited by their districts, where private schools have a broader geographical reach and can offer scholarships as well. More specialized schools also have these advantages. Substitutes to a traditional public or private school education are accelerator schools, like we mentioned, charter schools, homeschooling, magnet schools, all substitute forms that offer different types of education.
So there's 3 different constraints that we came up with for athletes' exposure to colleges. The first one is location, second is school funding, and the third one is exposure. And school funding and exposure kind of go together, like we showed in the PCP map. But the school funding is the most important thing because, as we said, with more funding, you get more exposure. But also location is really important because, low-funded public schools are located in poor neighborhoods, and athletes that live in these neighborhoods have no access to facilities that is going to help them get more exposure to colleges.
Some emerging growth trends in the industry are accelerator schools. Like we mentioned previously, these schools have unmatched resources and are specifically geared to send athletes to college to play sports. Social media and other resources for recruiting are also a new area where students are able to promote themselves in different ways. Going viral on Twitter or setting up an account on a recruiting website are valuable ways that students are using to get recruited and gain coaches' attention. Private trainers are becoming more and more popular, and with the right price tag, if students have money, then they can gain some valuable training that'll help them gain that advantage over their peers. Accessibility issues, unfortunately, is also a growing benefit, which means that the very top end of high school athletes is becoming much more expensive, and there's a lot of money being invested into it. And unfortunately, there hasn't been much progress made on the other side of the spectrum with low-funded public schools. In fact, it seems some funding is even decreasing in these areas. The new NIL era is also impacting the recruiting process. It's a new weapon for college recruiters to use, and high school athletes now have to decide if they want to factor in NIL deals into their college decision. Decline of recreational sports leagues. Also, as we said, more money and resources are being poured into sports. So youth leagues and leagues where players are not inclined to play in college are really being put on the back.
So by doing a case study of UNC athletic teams, we found a shocking trend. Nationwide, there is a ratio of 10 public school students to every one private school student. Through our UNC sports teams, we found that there is a ratio of 1.4 public school student athletes to 1 private school student athlete. But it's just interesting to see that even at a public university such as this one, that number is what it is. So at a private school, that number could flip or be even tighter. So there's a lot of opportunities for this space for innovation, as well as opportunities for coaches to minimize that gap at the public school. And the first one would be an all-encompassing online recruiting service. While there's similar services, there's nothing that does it all at a no to low cost basis. So by approaching school districts as opposed to individual students and schools, this will be accessible to all students. And this platform can do many different things, things that often aren't accessible to students at low-funded public schools. These include highlight videos, photography, stat databases, messaging and outreach and connection with coaches, program-sponsored camps and tournaments to reach this group of athletes that often don't have the accessibility when they have the talent. The second space would be partnering with large businesses through a nonprofit approach and sponsoring tournaments. By hosting these like no to low cost tournaments and camps in underfunded areas, college coaches will be able to reach a group of athletes that they haven't and aren't able to right now. And at the front of each coach's mind is, how do I get the best athletes on the field to win this game? And I think it's important to include all athletes and be able to look at athletes nationwide. So by using large companies and fundraising, we were able to host these events to no cost for these schools and students. And finally would be accessible college camps. While these happen at every college nationwide, they are extremely expensive and oftentimes only reach wealthier athletes. So keeping this problem in mind, it's clear that there are numerous ways, some mentioned as well as more, that can solve the problem, minimizing the gap between public and private school recruiting for these athletes that exists today.